It was October 27th, 2012, and I remember I was sitting on my couch when it happened. A tweet from then Grizzlies guard Tony Allen. Harden traded. Harding? Warren G. Harding? Tanya Harding? What was Tony talking about? A quick Google search revealed it was none other than Oklahoma City guard James Harden. Well, make that former Oklahoma City guard. Harden was now a member of the Houston Rockets. And you know, when we look back at what Harden has become, the trade package is almost laughable. Harden to Houston in exchange for Kevin Martin, Jeremy Lamb, and 2 first-round picks, which would become Steven Adams and Mitch McGary. 4 players who would never make an All-Star team or an All-NBA team for James Harden. And yeah, it is as bad as it sounds. But remember, at the time, Harden was a bench player. Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook were the engines behind OKC's offense. Harden had only started 7 games in the NBA and had career averages of under 13 points per game. But in just his first year with Houston, Harden became the focal point of the Rockets' offense and blossomed. He became an All-Star that year and for the next 7 consecutive years too. He became a 3-time scoring champion. He became the 2017-2018 MVP. But just as fast as Harden became Houston's franchise player, he wanted out. So how did this happen? What's up, everybody? I'm Troy, and in today's video, I'm breaking down the James Harden era with the Houston Rockets and going through all the moves that the Rockets made over the past 8 years that led up to James Harden wanting out. Where did the Rockets go wrong, or was James Harden destined to leave no matter what? Let's start with a little context on where the Houston Rockets were before they traded for James Harden. The Tracy McGrady and Yao Ming era was over. The Rockets had finished 4th in the Southwest Division the previous season, with a team made up of players like Luis Scola, Chandler Parsons, Kyle Lowry, and Goran Dragic. All legitimately good basketball players at the time, but not the type of guys you'd build a team around. They weren't good enough to make the playoffs, they weren't bad enough to get a high lottery pick. They were in the middle, and that's one of the worst places you can be in the NBA. But with the James Harden trade, the Rockets, and specifically Rockets general manager Daryl Morey, were banking on tapping into the potential the Thunder hadn't realized with James Harden on their team. 4 days after the trade and in Harden's first game of the season, he scored 37 points for the Rockets in a win over the Detroit Pistons. And to show it wasn't a fluke, 2 days later in a second game with the Rockets, Harden scored 45 in a win over the Hawks. The trade was certifiably a success. The Rockets had their star. Houston finished the season with the second best offensive rating in the NBA. They made the postseason and lost to Harden's former team, the Thunder, in the first round of the playoffs. But that was okay, because the number 3 guy behind Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook now had his own team and was making the case for being the best shooting guard in the NBA. The 2013-24 season saw Houston land one of the biggest free agents in Dwight Howard. He joined Harden, Chandler Parsons, who was actually pretty good back then, Jeremy Lin, also still pretty good, and up-and-coming players Patrick Beverley and Terrence Jones to lead the Rockets to the playoffs for the second year in a row, but again lost in the first round, this time to the Portland Trail Blazers. It's safe to say the team underperformed and Daryl Morey decided retooling was needed. So the 2014-2015 season would see the Rockets let Chandler Parsons leave in free agency to the Dallas Mavericks and trade away Jeremy Lin and a first-round pick to the Lakers. This was all done with the hopes of clearing enough cap space to sign Chris Bosh, one of the best power forwards in the NBA at the time. He had just become a free agent after spending the last several years with the Miami Heat. Daryl Morey had even tried to persuade Bosh to sign with the Rockets years earlier when Bosh was a free agent with Toronto, but this time the stars seemed to be aligning. Once LeBron James agreed to leave Miami and return for a second run with the Cleveland Cavaliers, the plan for Bosh to come to Houston seemed imminent. However, the Heat used the extra money that was now available after LeBron's departure to offer Bosh a larger and more lucrative contract that Houston couldn't match. The Rockets were left holding the bag. No Jeremy Lin, no Chandler Parsons, and now no Chris Bosh. To bolster their roster, they made a trade to bring in Trevor Ariza as a 3-and-D small forward and added Jason Terry, Corey Brewer, and Josh Smith. Due to the continued improvement of James Harden, solid coaching, and strong lineups on both sides of the ball, the Rockets would end up with the third best record in their franchise's history. That was good enough for second place in the Western Conference. They would find their stride, but eventually lose to the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference Finals. The 2015-2016 season was supposed to be the year the Rockets built on their previous year's success and serve as a legitimate threat to the Warriors' title chances. Instead, the season was full of drama, with coach Kevin McHale being fired 11 games in, complaints by Dwight Howard about his role in the Houston offense, Harden showing up to training camp out of shape, and a whole lot more. The Rockets whiffed on their first-round draft pick with Sam Decker, and a highly publicized trade for Ty Lawson went up in flames, and Lawson ended up being cut before the season was even over. The Rockets stumbled into the playoffs as an 8 seed and lost to the Warriors in the first round. By the 2016-2017 season, it was Harden's team once again. He signed a new 4-year contract. He said goodbye to Dwight Howard, who left to sign with the Atlanta Hawks. Mike D'Antoni was hired as head coach, and shooters Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson were brought in to space the floor around Harden and complement D'Antoni's offense. The Rockets spent their draft picks on Joe Chi and Chinanu Onuaku, who is most famous in the NBA for this.
You just don't see young kids doing this anymore, but he can make them.
He got a great touch.
2 for 2.
Lou Williams was traded from the Lakers in exchange for a first-round pick before the trade deadline to help the Rockets in their playoff push. As expected, the Rockets scored a lot of points. They ran up and down the floor, but they lost in the second round of the postseason. The 2017-2018 year brought another overhaul to the team. The Rockets traded 7 players and another first-round pick to the Clippers for Chris Paul. They signed human bowling ball P.J. Tucker to a 4-year contract and extended James Harden's contract again. They also kept Joe Chi and Chinanu Onuaku, who was still doing this.
There it is, underhanded.
Oh, he makes it.
Oh, and the team had a new owner in Tillman Fertitta. And yeah, that's seriously the name of his book. This season, James Harden won MVP. The Rockets scored even more points. They got up and down the floor even faster, but lost again to the Golden State Warriors in 7 games of the Western Conference Finals, in a game that will always be remembered because the Rockets set an NBA playoff record for missing 27 straight three-pointers. How do you even do that? In 2018-2019, the Rockets still didn't have a first-round pick, but they re-signed Chris Paul to a contract extension and signed Carmelo Anthony in what would end up being just a 10-game cameo before the Rockets released him. Now, I could do a whole video on the Carmelo Anthony era with the Rockets, but what you need to know is this basically ruined Carmelo Anthony's career until the Portland Trailblazers saved it when they signed him. This year was more of the same for the Rockets. They scored a lot of points, but not as many. They got up and down the floor fast, but not as fast, and they lost to the Golden State Warriors in the playoffs. That's now 4 out of the last 5 postseasons. The Rockets and James Harden had now developed a reputation as a team who could win a lot of games, but when it came down to it, they couldn't advance in the playoffs against the best teams. With the 2019-2020 season, the Rockets finally had an advantage over the Warriors. Kevin Durant was no longer on the team. Klay Thompson was out for the year with injury. The NBA championship race was wide open. So the Rockets decided to stand pat and make another run with what they had. Nope, just kidding. They traded away Chris Paul for a ball-dominant player with a history of stat padding and a history of not being able to hit outside shots.
What?
Not the type of player that meshes the best with James Harden. To make matters worse, they gave up even more first-round picks to make the trade happen. Harden and Westbrook scored a lot of points, but the Rockets could never develop a consistent rhythm or chemistry. The stoppage in play due to the pandemic didn't help matters, and the Rockets lost in the second round of the playoffs to the Lakers, but at least it wasn't the Warriors. That brings us to the 2021 season. Mike D'Antoni wasn't brought back as coach. Daryl Morey wasn't brought back as GM. Tillman Fertitta is losing money in his businesses and needs to cut costs. And it's become obvious to many Rockets fans and James Harden himself that winning is taking a back seat to saving money on the franchise. Harden questioned his role with the Rockets and he lost confidence in the organization. In a last-ditch effort to right the mistake of the Westbrook trade, the Rockets traded for John Wall, who hadn't played in roughly 2 seasons due to an injury. But at least this time, they're the team who got the first-round pick in the deal. The new lineup could have worked, but we'll never know. Stories from the first few games of the Rocket season included Harden showing up late for training camp, throwing a ball at a teammate in practice, partying way too much, and basically saying to the media that the team, and thereby his teammates, weren't good enough. And that brings us to today. James Harden was traded this week to the Brooklyn Nets in a 4-team deal. The Rockets got back more picks and pick swaps than any player has ever brought back in NBA history. So the rest of this season we'll be figuring out, what do the Rockets have? Who's in Houston for the short term? Who's in Houston for the long term? And where does the team go from here? So what do I think? When I look back at the Rockets franchise over the last few years, I think a few key things stick out to me as to why they could never reach the NBA Finals. One, they didn't find young players that could be part of the core. Either they didn't draft well with low picks. I'm talking to you, Isaiah Hartenstein, Joe Chi, Sam Decker, or they didn't have picks in the first place because they traded them away for short-term gain. They did that with the Lou Williams trade. They did that with the Jeremy Lin salary dump. You could say that they hit on Montrezl Harrell with a late pick, but they traded him before he was any good in the Chris Paul deal. Clint Capella, he was also a pretty solid late first-round pick. He was especially pretty good once Dwight Howard was off the team, but they traded him away and they were left playing 6'5" PJ Tucker at center for about 30 minutes a night. That's just something you can't do consistently in the NBA. And add to that, when you have guys making as much as James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Eric Gordon are making, then you have to have smaller salary guys that can play meaningful minutes and actually contribute to a winning team. The Rockets didn't have enough of those. And also, they ran up against a super team in the Warriors, one of the best NBA teams ever assembled. Now, the Cavs and the Raptors both proved that the Warriors could be beaten, and Houston came pretty close in the 2017-2018 season, but for whatever reason, they just weren't good enough to beat the Warriors. So maybe if they'd kept their core together instead of, chasing shiny new objects every couple of years, then they could have actually had some internal improvement, but the patience just wasn't there. So I'm sorry to see Harden go. It's too bad they couldn't work it out, but maybe this is just best for both sides. Hope you enjoyed the video. Would love to hear what you think in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video. This video took a long time to put together, lots of research, lots of writing, lots of editing associated with this, so would appreciate the support. If it's your first time here, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I do NBA videos like this several times a week. Check out the boxes on the screen for more NBA content like this. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Troy. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.